Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, the latest in the new series of webinars that we've been hosting over the last couple of months. My name's Jimmy Pierson, I'm the UK Director of ProVeg International, and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Heather Mills. Hi Heather, thank you for joining us.
Hi Jimmy, thanks for having me, thank you.
I've been really looking forward to this chat for quite a while. Your journey to this point is totally unique and fascinating, but it's your insights and your vast experience in the plant-based sector that I'm really looking forward to you sharing with everyone over the next 45 minutes or so. A little bit of housekeeping.
I'm really happy to be out in my factory gear, so I'm in my cash. This is a good excuse.
Perfect. Bit of housekeeping just before we get started. We'll have some time for a Q&A at the end, hopefully about 15 minutes. Everybody's automatically on mute, so if you want to ask a question, then please use the Q&A function to submit your question in writing there. I'll keep an eye on that, and I'll keep an eye on the time and field as many of the questions as I can to Heather. The webinar will also be recorded, so you can watch it back on the ProVeg website once it's been uploaded. Well, there's so much we could chat about and so many questions I want to put to you, Heather, but I would really love to start with your plant-based valley. I was blown away when I first read about it. It's truly pioneering and groundbreaking in its size, its ambition and scope. It's been described as the Silicon Valley for plants. Is that an accurate description? How would you describe it for those less familiar with it?
Having worked and lived out in LA when I was presenting on CNN, I've discovered Silicon Valley, and I thought, how cool would this be to do something that's just as big and is talked about in the plant-based sector and the vegan sector. And that was just like a dream at the time. And then I saw that we were always the leaders in the plant-based sector for 27 years as V-Bites, and we were pretty exclusive to Holland and Barrett in the UK, which has got as many stores as Tesco's, but small high street stores. And we provided to them for 20 odd years. And then I had a successful business. It was a 30,000 square foot factory. So, it was running great. And I fell in love with ski racing, learned it at the old age of 47, which is old for becoming a racer. I'm now 52. And I decided to let the family run the business, and I would do my bit promoting it and showing that you can be 47 and still win gold medals, because everyone was saying vegans have got no muscles because they've got no protein. So while I was out there, I discovered that actually in Austria, a lot of people were going vegan as well and growing great plants out there. So I came back and I said, I think we should start thinking about scaling. I think there's going to be a plant-based boom. And that was about 6 years ago. And I came back and saw there was lots of competition in the fridges next to us, which I'd never seen. And I said, hang on a second, who's this company and what's this company? And then I thought, there's some of the big corporate giants are starting to sniff around, and some small startups are starting to scale. And then I talked to both sectors, and I found that the small startups got to a ceiling in their garage or their local small third-party manufacturing. And I saw two problems there. One, making things in mixed facilities. Could be cross-contamination no matter how much you clear it down. We've always been 100% plant-based facilities, but when you're a startup, you can't just build a factory. So the only place they could scale was in third-party factories, so they had no other choice. And then I saw number two, if these big food sectors come in and finally learn to do the quality of product we do and the breadth, because we are the only company as V-Bites in the world that has 140 SKUs in the plant-based meat, fish and dairy-free sector. You've got lots of other big name brands now, but they only do 2 or 3 products. So I thought that's where we're going to be ahead. But where we're going to get ahead even more is how slow the big food companies are going to be. They move in the corporate world, unlike a family business. So they kind of steer themselves like a ferry, and we would be the little pirate ships, jumping around, making everything happen. But ultimately, we'd need to work with these big companies to get the vested route to market. But I knew they wouldn't invest tens of millions into factories that were 100% plant-based. So I thought that's another area we can get ahead of them on. So I had a choice. I had a certain amount of capital, and I thought, do I buy massive factories, or do I do what Beyond Meat's done and just throw a lot of money at the marketing, but not have a brilliant initial supply chain? So I decided to go for the former and basically buy huge factories. I could sniff that the public were looking to become involved in Brexit and potentially go down that route. So I knew we would destroy the economy for a little while, meaning we'd become the cheapest company, the cheapest country, should I say, to manufacture plant-based foods and export them, which turned out to be true. It's cheaper for us at the moment to make burgers and ship them to America than it is to make them in America. That's only going to last for so many years until we try and recover. And who knows with COVID now. So I bought the Walker's Pepsi factory, 200,000 square foot. And then I bought the Coty Procter Gamble X factory for 385,000 square foot. I didn't mean to buy them both. I put an offer in for both, and they both came off at the same time, because I really believe that the vegan sector is going to become that huge. Everyone said I was nuts, which is nothing new. So I went ahead and took the risk. And I also thought, why don't I set up Plant-Based Valley? So all the small startups and family businesses that were starting now, as I did 26 years ago, I knew they would come across the same problems we did, but they wouldn't necessarily foresee them because I didn't. And I could save them a lot of headache. So I thought, if we're under one roof, we can do mass manufacturing for bulk catering, food service. There's enough room to scale up and manufacture for these small startup families. So I set up V-Bites Ventures and invested in these small startups, and then set them up in my factory to scale. That means you get amazing procurement pricing, which you would never get as a small startup, direct links into distribution in over 24 countries like us, and the mentoring, the accounts, the legal, the manufacturing. You've already got a BRC accredited factories. So I thought this is a win-win for both sides, and it means they won't have this headache. So I thought, let's call it Plant-Based Valley, and that's how it came about.
Amazing. Yeah, it's really interesting, this private label, this co-manufacturing work. Who are you manufacturing for?
Well, we manufacture probably for about 60% of the plant-based foods that you see out there. So you'll see lots of brands, but it's got our product in it. The ones that aren't generally get manufactured in Europe, but more and more people are coming to us because of the tariffs that might kick in, because people want to, have more local procurement within Britain, but also because we're still going to be less expensive than Europe. So a lot of European countries are actually coming to us still to manufacture and expand into those countries. My dream scenario is to set up satellite factories in different countries and continents, so that ultimately we manufacture in Europe for Europe, UK for UK, because the demand is growing enough that we can justify that. America for America, even though America's made up mainly of lawyers. So you think twice before you go over and manufacture in America. I've got loads of friends and I love the country, but they'll sue anyone over anything. So it's kind of the last place I'm thinking at the moment. But I might look at licensing IP. We've got so much of it. I've always been a bit of a James Bond fanatic, so I've protected everything IP wise for so long. We never blend in the same factory we manufacture. No one in the staff apart from the family knows every element of it. So yeah, there's loads of things, but I can't tell you all of the companies we private label for, because we've got NDAs with a number of them, but the ones that are well known are Norseland, which have the brand Applewood, I replicated with the team the smoky paprika because it was a really popular premium cheese. And then we've just done Mexicana, and we've got a great relationship with Applewood. And now they're going into more and more and more. So we generally sort of find a company, and Northland were ahead of their game because most dairy companies at the time were opposed to us. And I said, the first one that bites will be the one that benefits the most, because I had a sister for years that just wouldn't go vegan because of cheese. And she said, if you can do the cheese, because the cheese is the opiate, then I'll go vegan. So that became a mission, and we've just started replicating that everywhere. So we do a number of the pizza companies.
Yeah.
We do hot dogs for different pizza companies as well, and salami and pepperami, and we do the steak for the Frey Bentos steak pies. We do the cheese for Goodfellas Pizza for Birdseye. We do stuff for the Co-op, for Waitrose, for Morrison's, for lots of different brands.
Wow, huge number
and
of
all over the
household
world.
names.
And people say, why haven't you grown your brand? And I suppose it was exclusive to Holland and Barrett for 20 odd years. And then they sold out to Letter One, and kind of changed their structure. And I won't go into too much detail, but we're going down a different path than the path we wanted to go down. So we've kind of launched more into places like Ocado. We've just come out with some gluten-free chicken nuggets for people with gluten intolerance. And, we've just done a microalgae smoked salmon with the French and the Germans with our algae. So, yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah, well, the Applewood smoky cheese I can personally recommend. It melts extremely well. You mentioned demand was there. How has demand been over the last couple of years?
Well, I mean, we've been on a roller coaster. We were always like the 30,000 square foot factory. Then I invested in the second factory, which was the allergen free cheese factory, which was 30,000 square foot. And I thought, let's try it out then. We did all the private label for Morrison's cheese. And then we decided we're going to grow in some other areas. So we've been overwhelmed actually with demand recently. But when Brexit was going on, a lot of people were cautious, and they were basically saying, well, let's see what happens with Brexit. We don't know if there's tariffs. And of course, as we know, Brexit went on and on and on, and it's still actually going on. And then we had COVID thrown on top of that. And then what happened with COVID was food service completely died. And luckily, we had our risk spread across. So we had retail, food service, and private label, and also online. Now, the online we'd never massively pushed, because once you start doing online, it's logistically very, very difficult. But we've had key customers for quite a long time. But I said, let's switch the online up, because food service is going to die a death. So we filled the online, or should I say, we filled the food service gap with online to sort of balance things out. And online is just growing and growing and growing. Retail doubled through COVID because everybody panic bought, and then that's kind of settled out now. But if I was advising anybody that's going into manufacturing, especially if you're a startup and you want to minimize your risk, I would basically say really focus on your online through this pandemic and how you can get a vested route to market there. If you get food service and it's not the majority of your business and your business won't go under, then obviously you want to grab it, but never be 100% dependent on food service, because my gut instinct is there's going to be another big wave. I've seen two types of people that are very cautious and thoughtful, and others that are just round pubs partying, not considering, because they're healthy and young and their immune system's high. They're not considering the vulnerable. So I think there's going to be another big wave, and I think the online stores are going to benefit the most. So always spread your risk. You know, people said, you know, why haven't you grown your retail brand? And I said about Holland and Barrett, it was also because I was fighting Rupert Murdoch and his journalists at the time. So I was never really shouting about our brand. But once we, as a team, put them in prison and got the huge apologies and settlement, we could start shouting about our brand about 9 months ago. So we are growing the V-Bites brand. We've just relaunched it. I think it happens in 4 days with completely new branding. We've always, prior to recently, used sustainable palm oil, but we've moved over to ethical non-primate coconut oil because everything we do is ethical. But for people that don't understand food manufacturing, the most sustainable oil per capita is sustainable palm oil. So people need to be flexible. The way the media just jump on it, something that's a fact and just spread it, is quite damaging to the food industry. So it's very important for all businesses, startups or not, to really spread their risk in their proteins that they're using in the plant-based food. So, you know, don't just rely on pea protein or soy protein or fava protein or lentil protein or all the areas. We have all of our products that can be made in a multitude of proteins. You know, you could have a soy protein crash in the country you're buying from, as there has been for people buying from China in 2008. You know, there's lots of things to consider.
Yeah, that way of mitigating and spreading the risk is sound advice, I think. Am I right in thinking you also consult or advise retailers in terms of moving more into the plant-based space?
Yes, I mean, I spoke to most of the supermarkets for many years, and there were a lot of brick walls. Some were more innovative than others. Holland and Barrett were the leaders in, you know, it, but when their chairman left, it all completely changed in their direction. So they lost a lot of their USPs, and also the supermarkets woke up to it. So they had no competition before. Now they've got loads of competition. It's everywhere. But we've always, because we've had cafes in the past that I did as community cafes, we've always tested the market. You know, so we've done all that market research for the last 12 years, feeding thousands of people from here to New York to see what products are needed. So when you're not plant-based or vegan, you presume that initially people want vegetable burgers and things like that, and that's what's made them very slow to move product, because ultimately you want to convert the carnivore to eat a reduced meat diet at least, and become a flexitarian. So that's why I've replicated everything with the team that you could possibly ever dream of over the last 26 years, so that there's no excuse. And you will get a small percentage of plant-based vegan eaters who only eat clean, pure foods. But the majority of them want to go for a vegan burger, a vegan pizza, a vegan hot dog, and vegan chicken nuggets at least once or twice a week. So it's important, and especially when it comes to their protein content, they're looking at those meat, fish, and dairy alternates, because they might not necessarily be able to digest enough lentils to get the requirements that they need. Because when I was young, I could eat raw food all day, but as I've got older, I don't have as much hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes to break down raw foods, so I have to minimize them and then balance it with other things. So there's a lot of things to take into to think about. So what I say to the supermarkets is, in days gone by, you would go in the freezer section and you would be put as vegetarian even if you were vegan. But more recently, where they've added in the free from sector, and then they've added in the alternate meat next to the real meat. The reason for advising this is because as the flexitarians are growing, and that is the biggest market, you know, you've got a mum who's got a vegan kid, doesn't want to walk all the way down that side and all the way back to the other and get to school on time and do everything else. So they will want to walk down the meat and dairy aisle and grab the meat and dairy alternate. So you could be losing out on that footfall and that consumer purchase. However, a hardcore vegan will not want to walk down the meat aisle because they're horrified knowing where that the slaughterhouse it came from. So you want to put them in a different sector, and they couldn't justify that shelf space before. They wanted to just shove them in one corner. They even misunderstood the market so much that they thought anybody that's gluten-free should go in the same section as vegan. So you got a gluten-free vegan pizza that tasted totally disgusting in the early days when gluten bread was awful. But now they've started to listen, they've seen the sales, and it is the fastest growing food category at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. You've been vegan for a long time, I know, and you've been working on developing alternative to animal products for a long time. Talking about ingredients, what kind of ingredients were you using then, and what are the predominant ingredients now that you're working with?
Well, 26 years ago, everything was soy, you know, but what was innovative back then was it was very easy to make vegetable burgers, even with soy. People used egg, milk proteins and things, but we didn't make those, so we did the vegan, and had a lot of companies try and copy us, but do it badly, who had bigger brand names at the time and put people off going vegan by making awful products, unfortunately. But we started with soy because soy is subsidized, as you know. The dairy industry is subsidized, so that was, you know, you could get it for like £2 a kilo, whereas pea protein was £6 a kilo. And while you had a market that wasn't really interested, you had to develop both, and there was a tiny market for the pea protein. So we developed pea protein burgers, you know, back in the early 90s, but we didn't sell very many because it was too expensive. So we had to focus on the soy. And then there was the misconception of soy, because you've got good soy and bad soy. The Japanese live off soy, they live off edamame, and it depends how things are fermented or processed or whatever. So there was a lot of confusion in the market and a lot of awful products out there as well. So I said, as I mentioned earlier, you need to be spread across all risk categories and basically have, you know, rice proteins, pea proteins, mushroom proteins, algae proteins is where we are now. The future really is algae.
Right.
About 15 years ago, I found out that a small percentage of people couldn't convert a short chain fatty acid to a long chain fatty acid when they were on a plant-based diet with linseeds and flax seeds. And if you had a mental health problem, I felt really responsible that, oh, you know, if they're not having the fish, that they could get the omega-3s from. But then obviously as things have developed, a lot of fish doesn't even have any omega-3s in because it's farmed these days, especially in the UK. So I said we need to develop an omega-3 from an algae base. So we developed a very high 421 milligram docosahexaenoic acid, which is DHA, icosapentaenoic EPA acid. But it got blocked for at least 10 years, and it's too long a story to go in today, but DSM Martech had the patent in America, so we had to wait for that to drop. But we launched that recently into a vegan algae capsule. And then we also have a biomass, and from that biomass you can make products, and then you can also make an algae protein isolate. So we're looking across the whole spectrum. But one of the weak potential areas to keep an eye out, as far as the protein isolates are concerned, is you really need to know that your ingredient supplier of these isolates, not just of vegetables, can grow at the level you're growing and as quick as you're growing, because there's no point creating something huge if you can't get enough access to pea protein isolate, which, because people don't understand enough in the food industry, they're all just jumping on whatever the current trend is rather than growing and becoming more creative. So, you know, there's fava isolates out there, and chickpeas and lentils, and it's just getting more awareness to the food companies. They are very much getting on board now, but if you're talking 6 years ago, they didn't have a clue. It was just soy and pea protein. And then we also move into mushrooms as well. A lot of health benefits from there. We've always added B12 and calcium for people that are concerned about that, and people that don't necessarily follow a great diet to get that from anywhere else. So the main thing that V-Bites is all about is problem solving. You know, if you've got an excuse to say, oh, I would become vegan if I could potentially have, you know, a steak with bells all over it, then we work out how to do it to actually be able to convert that person to do what's best for them, the environment and the animals. And that's the solution. In the early days, I was obviously, you know, an activist and like trying to just horrified that people could eat animals and destroy the environment and their health, because I went vegan for health initially at 25, not for any other reason. And then I learned about all the other areas. So yeah, it's, if you can't solve the problem, you're never going to create the solution.
I agree. Really interesting hearing you talk about the algae protein, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with a project called Smart Protein. It's a European Commission funded project that ProVeg is involved in over 4 years with lots of partners, and it's to develop novel proteins from byproducts from pasta, bread, and beer production. And the plan is to produce plant-based meats, fishes, and seafood and infant formula from these byproducts. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been talking to your team about that, and we were meant to fly over to Berlin and talk about that and have the meetings and everything, and then COVID popped up. So that is something that we need to work closely on, because, you know, all of those areas are going to help minimize the devastation to the planet.
Absolutely.
And I think everybody's more interested now than ever. You know, people are cooking from home more, people are starting to consider their health. People have either got really fit or really fat through COVID, and hopefully more and more people will want to get fit and healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us on to COVID. To what extent do you think it's interrupted your progress, or has it presented an opportunity for you?
Well, aside from the food service sector and that just dropping out, and I had a friend that had 100 million turnover business, 5.5 million net profit, and it literally died overnight because it was 100% dependent on food service, and that was really, really sad. Doesn't mean they might be able to pick it back up, but because it was very much, you know, sport and exhibition related and concerts, I don't necessarily know. They'll probably have to turn it into a different business. But for us, because we weren't 100% dependent on food service, as I mentioned earlier, we switched up online. Food service died and retail doubled. So since food service is kicked back on, we are delivering to them. But I've told the factories, don't go too crazy. You know the percentage you're allowed to go to on that, which capacity it can take up, because it could drop out overnight. You know, if those numbers fly up and the NHS can't cope, Mr. Johnson's going to start shouting, and then those pubs and clubs and restaurants are all going to shut down again potentially, which is why, having had restaurants and knowing how difficult it is to run them in a normal environment, I really think get yourself ready for some amazing delivery system in your community that can keep you alive through what could potentially be another wave. So be prepared for that. I know that companies like Leon were quite smart and kept about 60 of their stores open, and even sold toilet paper and all sorts of stuff to help the community when everything shut down. So I'm not saying go into all sectors, but just be prepared to, you know, prep up your food so you can deliver and have frozen meals ready, or something. I don't mean to be morbid. I'm very much, having worked in the former Yugoslavia, Iraq, and goodness knows how many war zones, I'm always thinking of the worst case scenario of what can happen.
Yeah, good advice. Have you got any insight into how COVID might have affected meat and dairy companies?
Well, interesting. Pre-COVID, the milk industries that I were talking to, sales were down by 30% because of the vegan coffee drinker. So that person that goes into a coffee house, whichever one it may be, doesn't have to be vegan to order an oat milk latte, or originally, before oat milk came in, soy and everything else. When I set up V-Bites cafes, we had oat milk, quinoa milk, rice milk, hemp milk, purely just to show people there are other milks than those from a cow.
Yeah.
I warned those milk companies that they would lose a lot of business, and they ignored it, unfortunately. And now they've come saying, can you make oat milk for us? Because one of my ventures, Milkman, makes amazing oat milk in glass bottles, and we deliver it around the Northeast, and it's becoming more and more popular. So they've lost probably about 30% of their business, which is a huge chunk. So I said, instead of just carrying on down that path, why don't you let us private label milk for you, and then you can deliver it, you know, to your customers, and fill that hole you have with a nice piece of vegan pie. So now they're finally listening and accepting. And it's really funny, because when I did the speech in Brussels to the farmers, trying to show them that they can actually make a better EBITDA growing alternate products like oats and things if the land is arable enough, they were very opposed to it. But on new discussions, most of their kids have gone vegan. So they're saying, oh, well, you know, they all want oat milk now, so I suppose we're going to have to do something. And ultimately, if the government gets smart, and Mr. Johnson, who's meant to be an environmentalist, actually wants to fix some things very quickly, he will encourage investment from the government in forms of grants, and for these companies trying to make a difference, as they are in Canada, putting 140 million into the plant-based sector, because it will fix a lot of problems. There's 3 billion a year in the UK spent on basically plant-based, you know, on subsidies for the cows. Sorry, that dishwasher keeps bleeping. I'm just gonna, can I mute you 1 second? I'm just gonna basically ask someone.
Interrupted by the dishwasher.
Right, I'm back on. That's
Okay.
it. Otherwise, it's just going to keep bleeping the whole time. Sorry.
No problem. No, not at all.
Yeah, we all live in normal dishwashing lives, if you're lucky to have one. So basically, we spend 3 billion a year, and that could be eliminated if we could fund and help farmers grow other plants that can turn into money. So I've been doing a lot of trials in different countries, and I keep trying to push it in the UK, and the farmers are more and more interested, because we're making oat milk. Why not grow the oats around our factories? Huge amount of area between Newcastle and Scotland that grows fantastic oats. That's local procurement. Turn that into business. And then that will minimize the pressure on the taxpayer to pay less subsidies, but it'll keep the farmer from not relying on those subsidies and be independent. So there are solutions to everything if we can just get through, you know, the political and corporate BS to actually make these things happen. They can happen very quickly. Everything's there. It's a bit like electrical cars existed many, many years before they were ever brought into place. So we need to just, you know, get a few more pirate ships around, start jumping on that big ferry and pushing it forward.
I like this. I like the sound of that. Just conscious of time, we've done 35 minutes, and there's lots of questions coming in for you. So I am going to switch to those and have a look at those now and put the first one to you, which is from Martine. How can startups from Europe join Plant-Based Valley? Can you explain what services you offer to startups in alternative proteins?
Right, well, it depends what product they do. So they should just write into us and basically say, okay, I'm making X. There isn't much out there that we don't already make. So I am interested in things that are different, but that doesn't mean that if they need us to make products that we already make, we can't make it for them. The positive side of that is we make it so we can just run the line longer and do some private label stuff for them with different flavors and tastes and things like that. The downside of new innovation is that the volume has to reach a certain volume before you can justify switching the machinery to something else. But what I'm doing in Plant-Based Valley also is sometimes I'll box 4 companies together. So that line could run for 3 hours for one company and then 3 hours for another small startup. And I've managed to do that with 4 companies at the moment. So there are ways around it, but we pretty much get back really quickly to advise them on if we can do it. And if we can't, where they need to get their sales to justify us switching the machines to any particular volume. And also we know the market inside out, and a lot of people don't do their homework, and they really must do their homework before thinking that they're the first person to have developed something. I remember a company called Blue Horizon had no idea that I'd been in this business for 27 years and went and they're doing a great job with what they're doing, but they came over and had no clue that we have all these factories and everything going on. And that's someone that's really in the sector. So I would say to everyone, research the heck out of what's going on around. And if you're a buyer, do your traceability, because a lot of things you're buying, people might say they manufacture them and they don't, they just third-party package them. So like my algal oil, which is called vomega3.com, is original, made in Britain, whereas most algal oils out there aren't the same solventless pure level, and they're third-party packaged from China. There's only a few that aren't. So it's really important you question where your products are coming from.
Great, thank you. I hope that helps, Martine. Another question here from Mike, which is, what do you think the biggest growth area will be in the plant-based alternatives market over the next 5 years? And also, how are you focusing V-Bites on delivering that?
Well, definitely in the microalgae. So we're working with the French. Like I said, we launched into Lidl for one of the private labels, and that sold out really quickly. So definitely the microalgae sector. We're the only ones doing it at the moment of any quality. So we're doing a microalgae smoked salmon that is delicious. So anything that's sort of new. The burgers will always sell, but everybody's doing a burger. It's so easy and basic now in technology and innovation. What people need to be careful of is high extrusion and extrusion things. They're so overdone and people get fed up with them really quickly. So you need to, we create proper pulled chunks and things like we do for free bent or steak pies. So I would say the microalgae sector. And if you're not in that sector, mushrooms and oat protein isolates, things that can be locally procured. So have a look at the plants in your own country, and if you want to grow in your own country and not just think ahead of outside, then look at what you can locally procure and turn that into a product. That would be my best advice, and get partnerships with farmers so you're not being let down or relying on China and other countries to ship stuff over for you.
Great, thank you, Heather. Another question here from Michael, who says, it's always a pleasure to see you and get your insight. How do you see severe weather patterns affecting the plant-based industry and supply chain?
Very, very good point, which is why we're looking more into hydroponics and aquaponics and things like that, where we can grow things indoors and, not be so affected on the procurement issue. So we have thought a lot about that. That takes more investment. The biggest weakness in this whole system, before we run out of time, because That's one of the things. It's really important. We can't just talk about all the solutions. The biggest weakness that everybody has is the funding. And what the government do at the moment is they do little funds for small family businesses and grants, but they don't consider where those people are going to go. So if a place like Plant-Based Valley doesn't exist within that country, those people have nowhere to go other than third-party manufacturers with mixed facilities. So governments and private equity and hedge funds and all that need to think about investing in big scale-up areas if they're going to get, you know, a real route to market. And banks need to stop, you know, being so tunnel visioned and think a bit more like America and what they've done with that IPO with Beyond Meat, which is phenomenal. That would never happen in the UK, but I'd love to be proven wrong that somebody would actually, you know, manage to make something like that work, because we still have a very old-fashioned banking system, and it's going to take an innovative head of a bank to actually say, you know, let's do a bit of sort of private equity type thing, but so that businesses don't have to sell out to scale, because people, you know, family businesses can run for 10, 20, 30 years and then they've got to sell equity, and they get squeezed down to peanuts just to carry on and survive, whereas really they should be given debt finance against, you know, their contracts that they're pulling to the table. But that's the weak area in the whole market. And the other thing I was going to say, and I don't know what it's like in Berlin where the moderators are, is if you're setting up a factory business, be very, very careful of dodgy brokers. So utility companies do not regulate their brokers in the commercial world. They do in the residential world, but you know, you get examples of, you'll have £1,000 worth of electricity, and this is all against your P&L, and that electricity actually is charged at £10,000. So they put it all in the small print, and I'm putting together a campaign for lots of family businesses that have been put in this awful position to force people like Npower, Total, these big companies to regulate their brokers, so these small family businesses, you know, aren't annihilated, especially for the food industry, because it's going on everywhere. And that is one of the big things through COVID-19 that I've seen happen over and over again. I know it's utilities, but you can't manufacture food without them. So it's a really important thing to think about, and not something that businesses always look into detail on, especially startups.
Thanks for sharing that, Heather. I think we've got time for maybe 2 questions, maybe just one. Let's see. Got a question here, which is, are you considering improving the nutritional value of vegan products, as there is some criticism on the level of salt or amount of processed ingredients like methyl cellulose?
Yeah, I mean, we've got, it's a catch-22, because we can do, and we do 100% clean label for certain buyers who are in the UK and who are happy to take a certain shelf life. But there's idealism and realism. And basically the idealism is all the products can be clean label, but you have to make them and buy them within a few days. If you want to be able to sell them, export them, you have to add either potassium sorbate or salt. Obviously, salt is going to be better than potassium sorbate, and we do natural sea salt, not sodium. So it gives it an extra shelf life, but it doesn't put the salt content up as much, but it's more expensive. So a lot of companies want to cut on their margins. So we don't do that. And what we've done with the cheese is that's 100% allergen free. So we'll make cheese for the UK with just a green traffic light, but for Scandinavia, where they're more knowledgeable on their food generally than us, they are fine if you add salt for a longer shelf life, because they know that when you get home, everyone in England shoves loads of salt on their plate. So everyone goes on and on about the salt content, and then the second it comes in, they get the salt cellar on and they start cracking it all over the cheese salad and parmesan pasta and, you know, vegan free dairy, you know, whatever. So there's again idealism and realism, and of course you want clean label, of course you want to remove things, but there's a consequence to that. We wiped out potassium sorbate completely for about 2 years, and our complaints went up 49% because the product would be shipped and it would blow really, really quickly. And then when we moved to biodegradable packaging, we would ship it out, and then the product would be just a mush and a mess by the time it got there. So, you know, there's pros and cons to all of it. So all our stuff's recyclable, and, you know, we're doing all of those things. Plus, you've got to change all of your machinery when you move to biodegradable packaging. So you've got millions of pounds of machinery that suddenly becomes defunct. Until recently, they're now looking at attaching machines onto the current machinery. But all those things the consumer doesn't know comes into play. And because there's not an endless pot, if you do all those things, the consumer suffers with the price point. So when the consumer proves that they're willing to add £1 onto their vegan burger for the factory just to even break even, then you can have that. But it can't be demand, demand, demand without reaching in your pocket, or more importantly, the supermarkets, because the farmers suffer with growing their plant products, the factories suffer, and then the supermarkets always keep their big margin, and then the consumer at the end of the day suffers. So somebody somewhere has to share the burden of the heightened price, and that's just the simplest way that I can explain it. And having been that person who started asking those questions, like your questions today, saying, yeah, but what about this, what about that, and then I would do it, and I had to learn the hard way. I had to have all the food returned because I wanted it perfect, biodegradable, pure, non-frozen, sent, and it came back. So we're in the middle ground, but the more demand that happens, the more, a bit like mobile phones. The first one I had was £800 and the size of my sofa in 1988. And now look at them. So this will happen the same way in the plant-based sector. It'll become more cost effective, because what I want to do is match it like for like. You can't have people spending £5 on 2 burgers. You know, if you've got a family of 4, it's unrealistic. So there has to be that idealism, realism thrown in with that idealism.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've run out of time. That was one of the quickest 45 minutes. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been a pleasure to speak to you, and you've provided so much advice and insight in that period. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, I hope anyone listening, it helps a few people not make the mistakes that I made to get to where V-Bites has got today. So lots of love to everyone, and good luck with everything through this difficult time. Stay happy and healthy. Bye.
Absolutely, thank you. Just a couple of points before we go. We're delighted at ProVeg to announce the new date for the New Food Conference, which is Europe's leading conference on new protein, and that's going to be on the 28th and 29th of April next year, when we'll be bringing together stakeholders in the food industry to discuss all the latest developments in the alternative protein sector. And secondly, for those of you that have not read our European Consumer Survey on plant-based food, that's available on our website. We surveyed 6,000 consumers across 9 different European countries, and we've now got country-specific reports for all 9 countries now. And if that's of interest, then please go and visit our website at proveg.com. Lovely. Thank you very much again.